In 1823, a trapper named Hugh Glass was mauled by a grizzly bear, left for dead by his own crew, and crawled nearly 200 miles through the Dakota wilderness alone. He survived for 6 weeks on nothing but roots, berries, and whatever he could pull from carcasses other predators left behind. Number 7 on this list kept more mountain men alive than rifles, horses, or maps combined. Number 3 was so calorie-dense that a single pound of it could sustain a grown man through 3 days of hard travel in below zero temperatures. These were not recipes. These were survival decisions made in the dark, in the cold, far from anything that resembled civilization. Hi, my name is Joseph, and this is Forgotten Old American. Let us count down the 25 rugged frontier foods mountain men actually ate to survive. Number 25. Raw liver, still warm. When a mountain man brought down an elk or a buffalo, he did not wait for a fire. The liver came out first, warm and slick, eaten on the spot. This was not savagery. This was intelligence. The liver of a freshly killed animal is loaded with glycogen, the same fuel your body burns during extreme physical exertion. Men who had been walking for 3 days on an empty stomach needed that hit immediately, before the cold could set in, before the energy debt grew too large to repay. Indigenous hunters had done this for thousands of years. Trappers learned it from them. The taste was iron-rich, metallic, and deeply savory. Men who survived their first winter in the Rockies stopped flinching at it entirely. Number 24. Pemmican. If you could only carry one food into the wilderness, this was the one. Dried meat, usually buffalo or elk, pounded into a fine powder and mixed with rendered fat at roughly equal weights, then pressed into cakes that hardened like brick. Sometimes dried berries were added, sometimes nothing else at all. A single pound of pemmican delivered close to 3,000 calories. It did not spoil. It did not require cooking. You could eat it frozen, thawed, crumbled into boiling water, or straight off the block while walking. The Hudson Bay Company ran its entire fur trade operation on pemmican for nearly a century. Without it, the northern frontier does not get mapped. It just stays dark. Number 23. Roasted marrow bones. After the meat was gone, the bones went into the fire. Mountain men cracked the long leg bones of elk, deer, and buffalo with a rock, then roasted the exposed marrow over coals until it bubbled and turned golden. They scooped it out with a sharpened stick and ate it like butter. Modern nutritionists now sell bone broth supplements at $8 a jar and call it a wellness trend. Mountain men called it Tuesday. The fat in bone marrow is extraordinarily calorie-dense, and the collagen it releases kept joints working through months of brutal physical labor. A man who knew his bones was a man who made it to spring. Number 22. Dried corn and nothing else. Trappers heading into the mountains for the winter carried corn in leather pouches on their belts. Not fresh corn, not cooked corn. Hard, dried dent corn that could crack a tooth if you were not careful. They chewed it slowly throughout the day, the way a modern hiker reaches for trail mix. Parched corn, corn that had been dry roasted over low heat, was lighter than flour and lasted longer than almost any other starch available. A single pouch could sustain a man for a week if he rationed it right. It was bland enough to make you genuinely angry, but it kept your legs moving, and that was the entire point. Number 21st, boiled rawhide. I want you to sit with this one for a moment. When everything else ran out, and sometimes everything did run out, mountain men boiled their own rawhide. They cut strips from a spare moccasin, a pack strap, or the edge of a saddle blanket. They boiled it for hours until the hide softened enough to chew. It provided almost no nutrition. The collagen offered a small amount of protein, but nothing that would actually sustain you. What it did was trick the stomach. The act of chewing something warm convinced the body that a meal had happened. It bought hours. Sometimes hours were all you needed to reach the next valley, the next creek, the next chance at a real kill. Here is what the novels and the paintings never capture about mountain men. Most of them were not rugged individualists living on instinct alone. They were students. They arrived in the wilderness knowing almost nothing about surviving it. And the ones who lived long enough to retire learned everything they knew from the tribes whose land they were working. The Crow, the Shoshone, the Blackfoot, the Nez Perce. These nations had developed a food knowledge so precise, so accumulated over generations, that it bordered on the scientific. A Shoshone woman could identify 40 edible plants in a landscape that a trained European botanist would describe as barren. The mountain men who paid attention to that knowledge lived. The ones who thought they already knew enough died quietly in the snow with a loaded rifle and an empty stomach. Number 20. Beaver tail. Beaver was the entire reason mountain men existed. The fur trade ran on beaver pelts, and when a trapper pulled a beaver from a trap, the tail was the cook's prize. The thick, flat, scale-covered tail was roasted directly over the fire until the skin peeled back and the fat beneath rendered into something rich and deeply flavored. In the dead of winter, when temperatures dropped below zero and the body burned through calories at a terrifying rate, beaver tail fat was concentrated fuel. French-Canadian trappers called it the finest thing the wilderness offered. Some of them were not wrong. It tasted, by most historical accounts, like something between pork fat and dark duck meat. Richer than either. Number 19. Camas root. The Nez Perce introduced this to Lewis and Clark in 1805, and the expedition nearly ate themselves sick on it before they figured out the rationing. Camas root, the bulb of a flowering plant found in meadows throughout the Pacific Northwest and Rocky Mountain region, was baked in earthen pits for days until the starches converted to sugar and the bulbs turned dark brown and sweet. Mountain men carried dried camas the way soldiers carry hardtack. It was dense, filling, and provided complex carbohydrates that sustained steady energy over long travel days. The dangerous part, and there was always a dangerous part, was that death camas grows alongside edible camas and looks nearly identical. You learned the difference correctly the first time, or you did not get a second lesson. Number 18. Bear grease on everything. A single black bear could yield 10 to 15 pounds of rendered fat. Mountain men poured it over everything. They fried corn cakes in it. They spread it on dried meat. They mixed it into pemmican. They rubbed it into their skin and hair to block wind and retain heat. Bear grease was moisturizer, cooking fat, weather protection, and calorie supplement all at once. A man carrying a tin of bear grease into the wilderness was carrying the equivalent of a modern survival kit in a single container. The flavor was mild and clean compared to hog lard. Some accounts describe it as almost nutty. Men who wintered alone in the mountains without it frequently did not winter through. Number 17. Straight black coffee boiled over an open fire. I know coffee is not exactly a forgotten wilderness food, but the way mountain men consumed it deserves its own entry because it bears no relationship to anything we call coffee today. They boiled water in a tin pot, dumped in a fistful of ground beans, and let it boil for 20 minutes until the liquid turned nearly black and thick enough to see your reflection in. Then they drank it scalding, without stopping. One account from a Rocky Mountain Fur Company journal in 1831 describes a trapper drinking what he estimated as 2 quarts of coffee before breaking camp each morning. 2 quarts before breakfast. The man lived to 73. Draw your own conclusions. Here is something the history books bury in footnotes. The rendezvous system, the annual summer gathering where trappers traded furs for supplies, was also the only time most mountain men ate anything resembling a normal meal for the entire year. For 350 days, A trapper lived on what he killed, foraged, traded, or boiled beyond recognition. For 2 weeks in summer, he ate. He ate dried fruit and sugar and flour biscuits and whiskey, which is not food but which everyone agreed counted. The contrast was so violent that men sometimes made themselves sick in the first days of rendezvous, simply from eating food that had flavor. Their bodies had forgotten what seasoning tasted like. Number 16. Elk nose. This is the one that makes modern readers stop reading. The nose of an elk was considered a delicacy by multiple Plains tribes and adopted quickly by the trappers who traded and lived among them. The nose was boiled for several hours until the cartilage softened and the meat fell away in tender, gelatinous pieces. The flavor was rich and surprisingly sweet. The texture was unlike anything else the frontier offered. Men who encountered it without knowing what they were eating often asked for seconds before they were told. Then, the response was complicated. But the bowl was already empty by then, which told you everything you needed to know. Number 15. Rose hips and pine needles. Do not skip this one because it sounds like something from a foraging blog. Rose hips and pine needle tea were the difference between arriving at the next fort with your teeth still in your head and arriving with scurvy. Vitamin C disappears almost entirely from a diet of meat and fat. Mountain men on long winter expeditions began losing teeth, developing bleeding gums, and experiencing a deep bone exhaustion that no amount of sleep relieved. The ones who learned to brew pine needle tea, a practice borrowed directly from northeastern tribes, avoided all of it. Just a handful of young pine needles, steeped in hot water for 10 minutes. They were free, available anywhere there was a pine tree, and more effective than anything a frontier doctor could offer. Number 14. Straight, rendered fat. Not fat as a cooking medium, fat as the meal itself. In extreme cold, the human body burns through calories so fast that protein and carbohydrates alone cannot keep pace. Mountain men in the deepest winter months ate rendered fat straight, by the spoonful, the way you might take medicine. Buffalo fat, bear fat, beaver fat. It did not matter. The goal was calories per ounce, and fat delivered more than twice what protein or starch could. Men who refused this, who found it too revolting to stomach, often did not survive their first real winter above 8,000 feet. The ones who accepted it understood something fundamental about energy and survival that most people today will never need to learn. Lucky them, genuinely. Here is what a mountain man actually carried on a standard trapping expedition. A rifle, a possibles bag containing flint, patches, and lead balls, a blanket, a tin cup, a belt knife, a tomahawk, and roughly 5 pounds of dried provisions. That was it. 5 pounds of food for a journey that might last 4 months. Everything else had to come from the land. This is not romanticism. This is arithmetic. A man who could not feed himself from the wilderness within the first week was already in serious trouble. The food knowledge these men carried in their heads was not a hobby or an interest. It was the entire margin between life and a shallow grave that nobody would ever find. Number 13. Jerked buffalo. Not the gas station variety. Buffalo was sliced into sheets as thin as paper, salted when salt was available, and not salted when it was not, then hung over a slow smoke for 2 to 3 days until every trace of moisture was gone and the meat turned dark and almost woody. Done correctly, jerked buffalo lasted 6 months without spoiling. A single buffalo could yield 40 pounds of jerked meat. That was a mountain man's entire winter food supply if he was careful and the weather cooperated. The taste was intensely concentrated, almost overwhelming, like beef reduced to its absolute essence. Men who grew up on it craved it for the rest of their lives in a way that made regular beef taste thin and pale by comparison. Number 12. Acorn mush. Oak trees grow across nearly every altitude mountain men traveled. The acorns they drop every autumn are loaded with fat and complex carbohydrates, but they are also loaded with bitter tannins that make them nearly inedible raw. Native women spent hours leaching those tannins out by grinding the acorns into flour and rinsing the flour repeatedly through water until the bitterness faded. The resulting paste was boiled into a thick, gray, neutral-tasting mush that was deeply filling and calorie-rich. Mountain men who wintered near friendly villages ate acorn mush through the hardest months. The ones who tried to eat raw acorns without the leaching process learned a lesson about botany that their stomachs would not let them forget. Number 11. Intestines turned inside out and roasted. The French trappers called it by a name that translated roughly as the Feast of Misery, and they said it with affection. They took the small intestine of a buffalo, or an elk, and turned it inside out, so the fat deposits that were on the outer wall ended up on the inside. Then, they coiled it around a stick and roasted it directly over the fire until the fat rendered and crisped, and the whole thing looked like a pale sausage. The taste was rich, slightly gamey, and intensely savory. Not a single calorie was wasted. The fat, the organ tissue, and the minerals in the intestinal wall were converted directly into heat and energy. It was nose-to-tail eating at its most literal, practiced by necessity long before any chef put it on a menu and charged $40 for it. Here is what modern nutritional science confirms, and what would have made a mountain man laugh out loud. The diet these men ate, organ meats, bone marrow, rendered fat, fermented foods when they could find them, and wild plants, was almost perfectly aligned with what researchers studying ancestral nutrition now identify as optimal for sustained physical performance in extreme conditions. It was high in fat, moderate in protein, low in processed carbohydrates, and rich in fat-soluble vitamins from organ consumption. The mountain man was not eating this way because he read a book. He was eating this way because the land taught him, and the alternative was dying. Sometimes ignorance and perfect knowledge arrive at the same destination from opposite directions. Number 10. Wild onions. Every river valley in the Rocky Mountain region produced wild onions in spring, and mountain men tracked their locations the way they tracked game trails. Wild onions went into every pot, every stew, every piece of roasting meat. They were not optional flavor. They were medicine. The sulfur compounds in onions provided antimicrobial protection that helped prevent the gut infections that killed more frontier travelers than violence ever did. A man who knew where the wild onion patches grew along his trapping route was a man who arrived at summer rendezvous with his health intact. The ones who dismissed plants as women's work and ate nothing but meat through mud season frequently did not make it to the trading post. Number 9. Serviceberry cakes dried into trail rations. The serviceberry bush grows from Montana to New Mexico, producing small, sweet, deep purple fruit that ripens in midsummer. Indigenous women dried the berries into flat cakes mixed with dried meat and fat to make a concentrated trail food that predated pemmican by centuries. Mountain men who spent summers near Crow or Shoshone camps returned to the trail in autumn, carrying bags of serviceberry cakes that flavored their pemmican and provided antioxidants. Their meat-heavy diet could not. The taste was sweet and slightly almond-like from the crushed seeds inside. Men who encountered them for the first time described them as the best thing they had tasted in months. That tells you more about the rest of their diet than it tells you about the berries. When a mountain man was sick, truly sick, unable to keep food down, burning with fever in a brush shelter while a blizzard moved in outside, the remedy was bark tea. Willow bark specifically, stripped from young branches and boiled until the water turned amber. Willow bark contains salicin, the compound from which aspirin was later synthesized. It reduced fever, relieved pain, and made the difference between a sick man who could function and a sick man who could not. This was not folk superstition. This was functional medicine practiced across dozens of cultures simultaneously because it genuinely worked. Every mountain man worth his salt knew this before he crossed the Missouri River for the first time. Number 7. Pemmican again, but the emergency version. There was regular pemmican and emergency pemmican, and the distinction mattered enormously. Emergency pemmican was pressed into cakes so dense that a single cake the size of a man's fist represented a full day of calories. It was made with the highest fat cuts of rendered tallow, pounded dried meat, and nothing else. No berries, no flavoring, nothing that added weight without adding energy. Men cached these cakes in waterproof pouches at regular intervals along their trap lines, the way a modern, long-distance runner places water stations on a race course. Finding a cache of emergency pemmican after 3 days without food was, by all historical accounts, an experience close to religious. The simplest food. The most important food. The one that held the entire frontier economy on its back. Number 6. Boiled moccasin leather. Different from rawhide, but the same desperate logic. When a trapper's food was genuinely gone, and the weather had closed off any possibility of hunting, the moccasins came off. The leather had been tanned with animal brains, a process that left residual proteins and fats in the hide. Boiled for hours, it produced a thin, foul-smelling broth that men choked down because the alternative was nothing. Hugh Glass, the man from the opening of this script, almost certainly survived portions of his crawl this way. It is not a recipe anyone would choose. It is what happens at the bottom of the frontier food chain, when pride has been fully consumed and only survival instinct remains. Number 5. Rendered buffalo tongue. The tongue of a buffalo was the single most prized cut the animal offered, and the first thing experienced hunters took from a fresh kill. The fat content was extraordinary. The meat was so tender, it required almost no chewing. Boiled whole for 2 hours and then sliced thin, buffalo tongue fed a man with the kind of complete, satisfied fullness that even a large portion of lean meat could never provide. At the height of the hide hunting era in the 1870s, commercial hunters took millions of buffalo purely for their hides and left the carcasses to rot. The tongues were the one exception. They were salted and barreled and shipped east, where they sold in New York restaurants as a delicacy for people who had never seen a buffalo and never would. Number 4. Fermented meat. This one requires context before you react. In extended cold weather, meat cached under snow or in cool underground pits would begin a slow fermentation process. Mountain men and the indigenous hunters who taught them understood that slightly fermented meat was not spoiled meat. It was pre-digested meat. The bacterial activity broke down proteins into forms the body absorbed more efficiently, and the fermentation process created B vitamins that a pure fresh meat diet severely lacked. Men who ate only fresh meat for extended periods developed a particular kind of fatigue and mental fog that disappeared when fermented foods re-entered the diet. They did not understand the biochemistry. They just knew that certain ways of storing meat made them feel stronger than others. Number 3. Blood soup. When a large animal was killed and nothing could be wasted, the blood was caught in a vessel, mixed with whatever fat was available, seasoned with wild onions or herbs when the season allowed, and boiled into a thick, dark soup. Blood is approximately 8% protein by volume. It contains iron, potassium, and a complete amino acid profile. The taste is metallic and intensely mineral, not pleasant to anyone who has not grown up with it, but deeply sustaining in a way that water-based broths cannot match. Arctic explorers, plains hunters, and mountain trappers across 3 continents arrived independently at the same conclusion. When the animal gives you everything, you take everything. The blood included. Number 2. Straight salt and water in winter. Not a food in any traditional sense, but the absence of it killed men just as surely as starvation. Mountain men sweating under heavy loads across mountain passes in below-zero temperatures lost sodium at a rate their meat-heavy diet could not always replace. Men who developed hyponatremia, critically low blood sodium, experienced confusion, weakness, and eventually organ failure. symptoms so similar to exhaustion that companions often did not recognize the emergency until it was too late. The trappers who survived long expeditions developed rituals around salt consumption that bordered on religious. Salt was currency, medicine, and life insurance compressed into a small leather pouch. The men who ran out of it and did not know how to find wild salt licks frequently did not make it home. Number 1. The full buffalo. Not one cut, not one meal. The entire animal used entirely over the course of days. Liver eaten raw at the kill site. Tongue boiled that evening. Heart sliced and roasted over coals. Kidneys fried in their own fat the next morning. Intestines cleaned and stuffed with chopped organ meat and roasted whole. Marrow cracked from the leg bones. Fat rendered and stored. Sinew saved for stitching. Bones cracked a second time and boiled for the last trace of collagen in the broth. A single adult buffalo yielded close to 800 pounds of usable material, and a skilled mountain man wasted almost none of it. This was not poverty. This was not desperation. This was a complete and sophisticated understanding of nutrition, efficiency, and respect for the animal that kept an entire civilization moving across the most unforgiving landscape in North America for over 200 years. We have forgotten more than we know. Here's my challenge. Look up pemmican this week and make a rough version. Use dried beef from the grocery store, rendered fat, and a handful of dried blueberries. Press it into a block and let it harden overnight. Then, take it somewhere uncomfortable, a long hike, a cold morning, somewhere that asks something from your body. Eat it there, not in your kitchen, out where it was meant to be eaten. Then come back and tell me in the comments if it hit different out there. I already know the answer, I just want to hear you say it. Share which entry surprised you most. I want to be sure the blood soup people find each other in the comments. I want to know if anyone's grandfather talked about pemmican the way Louis Armstrong talked about red beans and rice. Because these were not just foods. They were the reason the frontier got crossed at all. And the men who ate them deserve more than a painting on a museum wall. They deserve to be remembered honestly, with the liver still warm and the bones still cracking over the fire. This is Forgotten Old American. I am Joseph. I will see you in the next one.